Welcome to the Heart of Dad podcast. Heart of Dad is a podcast for entrepreneurs who are passionate about their families and business and looking to find more clarity, more balance and more alignment in all areas of their life. Come and join the community at heartofdad.com or on Facebook at groups/Heart of Dad. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Heart of Dad. Today I'm delighted to be interviewing Tim Jameson. Tim describes himself as having a wide variety of interests and life experience, with musician and writer at the top of the list. He's what some might call a multipotentialite. He loves thinking and communicating about a variety of topics ranging from philosophy and psychology to leadership, emerging technologies and the future world. Describing himself as an insuppressible people ponderer, Tim's main aim is to help people slow down and reach a place of peaceful fulfilment within themselves, regardless of life circumstance. Tim lives in Sussex with his wife and 3 children. And as you're going to hear in this podcast, we had a fantastic conversation about being a dad and running a business and working all sorts of hours to keep on top of things. And during the recording, Tim mentions his relationship with his son and talks about exacerbating that relationship. And Tim wanted to make sure that I let you know that what he meant was exasperate rather than exacerbate. Happens to us all, saying one word and meaning another, but I'm sure you'll get the meaning anyway. So enjoy the podcast. So I'm delighted to welcome this week to the Heart of Dad podcast, Tim Jameson, my good friend and ex-colleague. And it's great to have you here, Tim.
It's really good to be here, Matt. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you've done and doing in your life, and tell us a little bit about yourself as a dad as well, if you can.
Yeah, well, okay. I could probably talk for the entirety of the podcast just about me and who I am and what I do, what I've done. As Matt said, my name's Tim Jameson. I live down on the south coast in a place called Worthing. The temptation when asked who you are and what you do is to launch straight into, I think particularly as a chap, to launch straight into what you do for work. How do you earn your money? But for those of you who don't know me, and that's probably the majority of the people who will be listening to this, I'm currently taking a career break or a sabbatical. I'm 3 months in now. And that's really reinforced in me the fact that when talking about who I am, who we are, it's good to look beyond just career. And so maybe if I just start by telling you a little bit about who I am outside of the world of work. So I'm a dad, I'm a husband. I've been married to my wife Charlie now for nearly 19 years. And if she listens to this, she'll probably give me a slap because I've got that wrong. I think it's 19 years. I've got 3 children, growing up very, very quickly. I've got my eldest, a girl, Molly, who's 15. I've got Arthur, who's 12, and I've got Ethel, who's 7. No, she's not 7. She's 9. She was 7 once upon a time, but time moves on so fast. And that's one thing that we might get onto, but remembering birthdays as a dad is really, really important, but I think something that we're all pretty bad at. By background, I'm a musician, I'm a designer. Since a very young age, I've been very, very interested in the way things work. My dad's an engineer, but also very interested in the way things look and feel. So kind of ergonomics, design, whole world of product design. But then, as I've said, very much then how things work too. So I remember when I was at university, I was very, very interested in the beginnings of the Dyson vacuum cleaner, and that had a big influence in my early life, I guess, moving away from home and deciding what I wanted to do job-wise. And that brought me down to Brighton, and I've stayed down on the south coast ever since. But I'm very, very interested still in people's affiliation with products and stuff and the whole world of marketing and consumerism. And then that leads on and branches out into many other things too. I've already said that I'm a musician. I find music is a brilliant way to express yourself in a kind of once removed way. So you can be very, very honest and open in music and songwriting. And I guess a bit like poetry too. You can say things that are very personal and very relevant to yourself, but people can choose to interpret them however they wish. But music's been a big part of my life. I am very interested, increasingly interested in psychology, in the study of people and personality. And that was really born out of wanting to get to better understand how I work in the context of family as a dad, how to better relate to my children, how to be a better partner to Charlie, and just how to, in a work context, how to better lead and manage those around me, how to be more of a genuine inspiration to other people, how to understand how other people think and feel, such that when I am talking to them about various things, I can better see their points of view. I would say those people who know me know that I'm quite an empathetic person, which can be a blessing and a curse, but mainly a blessing, mainly a good thing, particularly in the whole world of people and being a dad, being a manager, being a leader. And so, yeah, that's me. And fast forwarding to right now, as I've already said, I'm currently taking a pause from a career perspective. And the main reason for that is I'm kind of, I guess, halfway through my working life. And I've always been quite a driven person. I like to work very hard, but increasingly I found it hard to keep the kind of social family thing in balance with work. So I thought it would be a wise thing to do, to just take the opportunity at this point in my life to take a step back and to refocus and reflect on what's important, what my children need of me, reflect on my social life, and just reflect on things like my relationship with money and what I deem to be success in inverted commas, and just to think more about things like we're talking about today, Matt, just taking a step back, reflecting, being honest, and through being honest with myself, hopefully moving into a position where I can help others who are in a similar situation to me, or maybe younger on in their parenthood, and just use this time as an opportunity to take a bit of what lots of people would say is quite a bold step, to put myself deliberately in a place of, I wouldn't call it financial insecurity, but in a position where change is going to be ahead, and I don't know exactly what that change looks like yet, but I think sometimes the best things happen when you take calculated risk, and that's what I'm doing. So that's just a little bit about me. I'm at an exciting place.
Brilliant. I loved so much of what you shared there, Tim. It's really rich, and I think just to acknowledge something you're sharing, which I think not many men or women do, is to take a conscious break like you're doing in your career, to have that reflection and to take stock, to really reconnect with what you want and are looking for out of life. That does seem like a bold step to me, or at least an unconventional one, perhaps. You said something in the introduction, which I think, your motivation for taking that break, which is really a theme that keeps coming up in the work I'm doing here in these interviews and this podcast, The Heart of Dad, and that's around balance. And I think when I first met you, you were self-employed at that point. You had your own business, and you made a choice to move into employment. Yeah. And then you've been in that employment for some time, and then you've taken this break more recently. And I wondered about balance throughout that period, and whether you've noticed, having 3 children, I guess, when you first when you were self-employed, you had 3 young children, or you had a child on the way in that period.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
It was it was an exciting time. It was quite, and I may make a fool of myself now by using a word which isn't right in this context, but I think it was quite a tumultuous time. That's the right word to use. Coming from a position, as you have said, of being self-employed, where you feel very reliant upon yourself for everything, and therefore you can end up working all the hours under the sun. And I remember many times working through the night just to get jobs finished, to get the bills paid, and to get myself into a position where I was able to, back then, carve out time to spend with the children. Then moving into a period where I had the opportunity to become full-time employed. Back then, Matt, with the company that you were one of the partners for. And I think back then I actually made a bit of a mistake in terms of how I managed myself and my time, because I treated, at least in the early days, moving into full-time employment as being exactly the same as working for myself. I gave exactly the same number of hours. I continued to almost work as though it was me who owned the company, and the company's success relied on me. And whilst in many respects, I was absolutely fine with that. I really enjoyed what I was doing. I loved the people that I was working with. I think just in terms of me personally, that set me on a track, I guess, for potential burnout, not least as I was still trying to give as much time as I possibly could to family and friends and outside work pursuits. I like the term work-life integration. Lots of people still use the term work-life balance, but I think work-life integration is more apt, particularly in the context of someone like myself who, as I've said, is fairly driven. If I give myself to something, be it a work pursuit or a social or a family pursuit, I generally give my everything. And it therefore becomes about, how do I manage to do all these things at the same time, almost in an integrated manner, and still maintain energy levels, still maintain a position where I can be present to those around me. So if I'm with my family, I can be really present to my family. When I'm not physically present, my mind's elsewhere, but where I'm giving them my everything. But the same in a work context too, where if I'm at work and I'm able to give myself to my work fully, to get the job done, to engage on all levels with colleagues and those around me. I think that time back that's probably about 10 or 11 years ago now, the period that we're talking about. It was very invigorating, it was exciting, but it was also extremely exhausting. And I knew not so many months after I moved into full-time employment that something needed to change, otherwise something would give. Would be a good way to put it.
So how did it, I mean, that really resonates what you're saying, and I remember that experience, particularly when you're growing a business, of it being absolutely full on and can become all consuming. And I'm just wondering, given I guess you would have had a 4-year-old, a 1-year-old at that time, and with Ethel on the way a bit later, how did you practically manage that switching from being so full on in work to returning home to the needs of young children, which are quite particular, aren't they? And a partner, of course, who's also managing that when preschool children.
I think, to be very honest, Matt, I didn't manage it very well. Using the term managing it suggests that there is an element of managing it and being successful in that. I went into, I think, being very honest, survival mode. And that wasn't survival mode that you would necessarily have seen from the outside. I'm somebody who manages to remain pretty calm at most times. And that's in all different contexts. People have always said, Tim, you're a very calm person. And I think one of the ways that I managed it was to almost, or the ways in which a means that I employed that I thought was going to enable me to manage it was to remain deliberately very, very calm on the outside, and to I can remember trying to survive on less and less sleep. So I was somebody who would always take work home. So I might leave the office on time, but it was always with the intention of going home, spending some time with the family, and then getting the work back out and just continuing for as long as it took. And that was often until well into the early hours, and then getting up earlier and earlier too, and then forcing myself to get back into the office. I can remember then, as has always been the case, using exercise. And that for me, if I get that right, and if I'm eating well, if I'm sleeping well, it's a bit of a silver bullet, or is a silver bullet for me. Exercise is kind of like medicine for me. And if I'm in a place of motivation, and as I say, as long as I'm getting sufficient rest, exercise is something that I did use back then and continue to use now as a way to manage my time and to manage my presence in the moment. It helps me to clear my head. It helps me to compartmentalize, particularly exercising at some point between being at work, being in an office environment, to being back at home with the family. If I can get some exercise in that interim periods, it means I can come home and I have a much clearer head, and I can give space and time to family. But as I said, but I think back then, whilst I tried those things and I did the best that I could, I didn't actually end up managing myself very well. And it's taken me a lot of years since then to adopt, well, to almost admit that in terms of my drivenness, I have to be careful. I have to be more self-aware than I was being back then, and that I do have a limit. My energy is finite. My ability is finite. And then there's obviously age that comes into as you get older. You don't have the same levels of energy that you once had, and so there's been like I had to go through a period at a time, and I'm still going through it now, of kind of being very honest with myself, realizing that I do have boundaries, I do have limitations, and that I have to make choices, and that I can't. If you've got a head full of dreams, you can't necessarily realize all of those dreams, because some of them will be if you realize dreams in some areas, it will be at the expense of other areas, and often that can end up being at the expense of family, and as we're talking about today, at the expense of your children. It's funny that, isn't it, how in the context of work, particularly if you're working in a small business and every second counts, you often give the first fruits of your energy to your customers, because they're the ones who ultimately pay the bills and keep the business going, and then your family or those closest to you get the last of your energy. I've really realized that as well, and that's something that I'm trying to turn around, to get myself into a position where I'm consciously giving, I call it the first fruits of my energy, to those closest to me. And then if I end up in a position where I'm finding I then don't have sufficient energy to give to others, or talking about give to clients in the context of work, then something needs to change. But I always want to be in a position where I'm consciously putting my family first as opposed to last. So that was a bit of a roundabout way of answering your
not at all
your question, but just to summarize again, I didn't manage that time very well in the context of family.
Well, what strikes me in listening to you, Tim, and to other dads in similar positions, is that yeah, and this is true for parenting as well, right? It's not as if there's an instruction manual that gives you the optimal way of managing that. I love that phrase, that work-life integration. I think it is more appropriate than balance in a sense. Though I also see that men are often struggling with the idea of balance within themselves. And it
Yeah,
seems to me that, you know, through your process of reflection, you've come to some realizations, which I'm sure people listening would actually find incredibly helpful about. I love that phrase about the fruits of your energy and being able to put your family first there rather than
yeah,
last. Because I think when you are driven, you know, the pendulum often swings in the other direction, right? It's something that's been my experience in life, that my first impulse is to go into the busyness, to really immerse myself in the excitement and the fascination and the delight of work, and sometimes the stress and worry and the pits
yeah,
of it as well. And family life can go not forgotten, but like very much in the background when that
yeah.
happens.
I Matt once heard um, a phrase which is, this is many years ago, which has always stuck with me, which is, it was something like, when, and it used the term when a man, so I'll say when a man, when a man says, I'm afraid of losing my job, what he's actually meaning is, I'm afraid of not being able to pay my bills. And it's, there's there, in the context of what we're talking about now, I think in many people there's an underlying fear and underlying anxiety at play, whether they realize and recognize it or not. What they're fearful of is that if they don't commit and drive themselves harder from a work context, they're ultimately at risk of being in a position where they can't support their family. And so it becomes like a bit of a vicious cycle. And I think mixed up in that too is, certainly if I'm very honest, and I'm sure there'll be others who can relate to this, there's the feeling of my clients, those who pay the wages, they're not going to have patience with me if I don't deliver to them what they're paying me for, and they'll just go to somebody else. Whereas if reflecting on your family, the temptation is to think, but my family will always be there. You kind of take, it's very easy to take them for granted. And therefore, when faced with the realization of my time is finite, I can't be all things to all people, my family included, then to use your analogy around the pendulum often naturally swings towards keeping your employer happy or keeping your clients happy. But I think, again, as you get, I know for me personally, as I'm getting older, I'm seeing more and more people who are successful in inverted commas in a work context, but not successful, are actually obviously unsuccessful from a family context. Which I'll just mention another phrase that someone said to me that's always stuck with me, and this was probably a good 20 years ago now. They said it's very uncommon you find a man who's successful in both work and family. Back then, I just disregarded that comment. I thought, yeah, that's just one of those kind of throwaway lines. But it's really, over the last little while, it's come back to me again. And yes, it comes down to how you define success. What does success mean? I think you can earn a good wage and also be a successful family person in terms of being present for your family, being part of your children's education, giving your partner the love and attention that they need. But I don't think, if I took that step, I don't think you kind of have a love of money and a love of your family. You can't commit and give yourself to both those things. You can't run after wealth and run after your family. The two end up being in tension with each other. But in many contexts, particularly if you're in a good job, if you're well respected professionally, going and giving yourself to your work can actually be the easy way out. It's easier sometimes to do business than it is to do business in a work context than it is to do business in a family context. And then if you neglect family and your children more and more, it becomes harder and harder to reintegrate yourself. The children grow up very quickly, and with my eldest now being nearly 16, I've had a bit of a wake-up call recently, just thinking, crikey, she's going to be potentially leaving home in 2 years' time. Where did all that time go? And I hear all too often guys saying to me, Tim, don't do what I did, which is to waste the years when your children are younger, the time when they want to be with you, but you're too busy and you always put it off till the next day. Suddenly you have a wake-up call and you want to spend time with them, but they've hit the point where they're not so interested in spending time with you anymore. And they've used terms like, and that being a heartbreaking experience. And I don't want to go through that. So yeah, my call out to all the dads out there would be, at least consider this. Take a step back, because the years from a dad perspective do go past very quickly. And I think being a dad too, being a dad is the one job that you're irreplaceable at. No one can do a better job. That's too weaker a term. No one, if you're being the best dad that you can be, no dad can make a better job of being a dad to your kids than you can. It's the one job that you're irreplaceable at.
So many pearls of wisdom in what you've been sharing, Tim. And I think it's a good kind of segue into the topic of guilt, which comes up a lot in my discussions with dads. You know, one of the shadow sides of that, driving yourself very hard, and the pendulum swinging towards the driving yourself, creating money, or being able to pay the bills for your family, when that kind of floats up to the top in a sense, and you know that you're not spending as much time, or you're present but you're not but you're not present. You're physically there but you're not, emotionally present with your kids. A lot of people, and myself included, experience enormous guilt about that, about not measuring up to be that dad that is so important to be. I just wanted to know what your experience of that emotion was, if any.
I felt lots of guilt in terms of my being a dad, and that can hit you at the most unexpected times. I think lots of dads, lots of parents will associate with this, the feeling of in a work context, we're used to giving ourselves to others at pre-agreed times. And by that, I mean, if someone comes to you and says, Matt, I have a personal or a work issue that I'd really appreciate talking with you about, you can 9 times out of 10 pre-agree a time that's not right now to talk through that stuff. Whereas being a parent, often kids want to talk at the most, just from a day-to-day perspective, at the most inconvenient times. Mm-hmm. And so you might be in the middle of, for instance, give a really obvious example. You're sat, as we all do now, you're sat on the sofa on your laptop, but you're on your phone too, and you're waiting for an important call to come through, and you're desperately trying to get an email out, because if you don't get the email out, there's a fear that it won't go out on time, and therefore there'll be a consequence to that. And then your child comes in and asks you a really philosophical question about something, or they're upset about something and they just want to sit with you. But the instinctive reaction is not right now, or almost worse than that, as dads, go and talk to your mum. And at that moment in time, that feels very justified. And you might just leave it at that, or it might turn into an argument later down the line, or you might do that over a number of consecutive times, whatever. I then often find it's then when the kids are in bed at night and I finish my work and I'm just either trying to go to sleep or just sitting down reflecting on the day, that's when the sense of guilt comes. Or if I'm a typical time for me is if I have to go away for a few nights, and I'll get in the car or I'll be on the train or whatever, and I'm going away from the family, that's when I'll reflect back on the family, and this the feeling of guilt comes. And I and a response to that is typically to make a commitment in my own mind to behave differently next time certain situations arise, but then 9 times out of 10 I do exactly the same thing again the next time, because it's complicated. Emotions are concerned, deeper things of life are concerned. But coming back to your question, yeah, I do frequently feel feelings of guilt around my fatherhood. And as I was thinking about this podcast, I was drawn back to a phrase, and this isn't kind of come across super spiritual or anything, but there's a phrase, I think it's in the Bible actually, and it says, fathers don't exacerbate your children. And I love that word, exacerbate. I think it's so important, that term, exacerbate. And I particularly think of this when reflecting on my son, who is just in terms of a parenthood experience, he's very different to my girls. As you would expect, boys and girls are different. But my son, if I exacerbate him, if I frustrate him, but exacerbate is such a good word. If I exacerbate him, his natural reaction as he gets older is to stop coming to me. So he might have come to me when he was younger and wanted to play, and I'd said no. And then he'd try again and I'd say no. And then as he gets older and more physical, hey dad, come out on the trampoline with me. I just want you to watch me jumping on the trampoline. I'm really proud of what I'm doing. Oh yeah, okay, I'm coming out, but I'm going to bring my phone too. And I'm just going to be on my phone while you're on the trampoline. And he just wants me to look at him, look at me. And then there's feelings of guilt that come as a result of that. But then he gets a little bit older and he stops asking me to come and watch him. And then he just wants to be with his friends. And then I'm on the cusp now, feeling that feeling of, I want to spend more time with him, but he's now at that age where I'm at risk of him slipping away. And that really does turn the volume up on those kind of feelings. And again, I particularly feel them when I'm separate from the kids, when I'm in a place of separateness from them, but where there's nothing demanding my time, so I can reflect. So if I'm driving in the car or traveling or trying to go to sleep at nighttime, that's when I feel those feelings. But there's, and Matt, you might be coming onto this, but just very briefly, there's certain things though that I think bring a sense of healing to those feelings of guilt. And I've got a long way to go in my discovery of these things. But one thing that I have found has been very powerful for me over the last 3 months of not being in employment have been that my son sometimes has bad dreams, as kids do. And it always used to bother me that if he was ever if he ever had a bad dream, or he was feeling unwell, or he needed something, he'd always call for his mum. He'd never call for me. And I didn't want to make him feel guilty by asking him why he never calls for me. But I've noticed since I've been off work, he's calls for me during the night time. And that's been, and I've heard him, it's woken me up, and I've gone in and given him a hug and been able to get him back to a place of rest. That's been really powerful for me to be able to have him choose to come to me first, and then for me to be able to go and comfort him in a way that he would never have done, and I would never have done up until recently. And if I hadn't had this experience more recently and he'd got older still, I might never have experienced that. So
what a beautiful
that's been quite powerful.
Yeah, I love that. And it's kind of what I hear in that is like through your presence, through this time that you've chosen to take out of the work environment, your presence in the family has allowed you to deepen your connections or reconnect with your children in a even more profound way, which is, it's just beautiful to hear. And it makes me think, actually, maybe down the line you'll come back, Tim, and we'll have a a chat just about being a dad to a boy, and maybe at some point to girls as well, because I'm really intrigued in those differences, and I only have the experience of being a dad to a boy. So I'd love to talk to you more about that someday.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And
That'd be great, Matt.
and yeah, I mean, I'm glad you sort of touched on, ways of managing guilt, and it seems to me that example you gave of connecting with your son when he has nighttime sort of bad dreams is really beautiful. That conversation, in my personal experience, could have gone either way. It could have been, oh yeah, I was wondering why he doesn't call out for me, and I feel left out, and all the stuff that you shared just there. Or it could be, oh geez, I've got to get to work tomorrow, and here I am woken up yet again, and I'm really worried about my capacity to get on with my job when my nights are interrupted, which happens, can happen a fair amount with children, particularly at a younger age. And it kind of brings me on to the topic of anger, because this is one I think that is really not spoken about. Pretty much every dad who's been comfortable enough to share with me has, when I've said, oh yeah, sometimes I get really angry, and then I feel terrible about it, and that guilt comes in, and when I see how I've behaved objectively, it's way off base, right? And when we get into sort of idealized versions of parenthood and fatherhood, that doesn't get spoken about much. But I think every dad who I've spoken to who's been really honest about it goes, oh yeah, that's me too, right? I get really angry sometimes. My frustration boils over, or my irritation or my grumpiness comes into play. And I just wanted to know if it's okay to ask you that, and whether you would share your experiences of anger.
It's absolutely okay. When I was a boy, I remember my dad, and he wouldn't mind me sharing this, but my dad used to struggle with anger issues, like I think lots of dads do, and I don't mean serious anger issues. I just mean almost a lack of being in touch with other emotions, meant where another person might cry about something, my dad wouldn't cry; he'd just get angry. But he was very successful most times at suppressing that, as I think lots of guys are. So when they say they get angry, they don't always mean they get angry on the outside. They just feel angry but don't know what to do with it. And I think my experience of being parented was at least in my formative years, to see somebody who I could tell, and I said I'm quite empathetic. So I saw that in my dad, and I think part of me then, when I became a father myself, pushed against that and said, I'm not going to be like my dad. So I'm not going to be angry. I think if you're an angry person, it's not enough to say I'm just not going to be angry. But I found, on the subject of anger, I've struggled with a number of things, but I would say anger really for me hasn't been one of the things that's been the real struggle. I can honestly say I'm not an angry person, but I do still sometimes feel anger, and I think the way it manifests for me in the context of parenthood is often to do with I think, on one hand, time, when there's too many demands being made on my time, and I just don't know how to. It reaches a point where I almost don't know how to behave, and you must put the childhood tape in, and the childhood tape starts playing, and that can be just to suddenly have a random explosion and just get really angry in the heat of the moment, but often in quite a self-pitying type way. If I'm honest, it kind of comes out of feeling sorry for yourself. Or actually, for me, anger can manifest itself because of others not understanding why I seem to have not a lack of anger within me, I'm not someone who wears their heart on their sleeve. So lots of people will healthily express their emotions in the moment, and therefore they won't get that sense of something boiling up within them, and then it comes out in too big a way. I'm someone, I don't wear my heart on my sleeve, so I have lots and lots of emotion within me, but I deal with it in a Tim way, and that's 9 times out of 10 fine as far as I'm concerned. It's my sense of normality. But what it can mean in the context of parenthood is, let's just take a really obvious example. I'm sure a lot of dads can associate with this. The children will be fighting with each other and screaming and making lots of noise, and mum is getting agitated and looking at you as dad with that look of, you're going to do something, doesn't that annoy you? You're going to do something about that. And I, as dad, am sitting there thinking, I can deal with a bit of noise. I can just switch off from it. They're just being kids. And anyway, I've got other things I need to invest my energy in on this other thing. So I'm just going to let it go. And then it goes up to the next level. And then Charlie, my wife, might say, right, I'll go and deal with it then. And then if I'm in a particularly fragile place, in inverted commas, in terms of lack of emotional capacity within me, if I've had a bad day, or then sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes it can suddenly kick in within me to almost say, right, well, I wasn't feeling angry, but now I'm just going to make myself feel angry so that I can go and deal with it in the way that you obviously want me to deal with. You want me to show some emotion. And then my wife would say, but I didn't mean like that. I didn't mean go and scream at the kids or chase one of them upstairs, because now that hasn't helped at all, which can then make me actually feel angry, because I don't know how to then deal with that. Well, you told me to do something about it. I didn't feel like I naturally wanted to do something about it. So then I had to sort of do something that didn't feel natural. And now you're telling me off for that. And so now I don't know what to do. So now I do feel angry. And now none of us are in a good place, are we? So, and then willing myself, okay, well, next time I'll just be even more quiet, or there must be something wrong with me then. And then going back into the self-pity loop sometimes. So that's how in the context of that's how, if anger was raises its head, that's generally how it does come about. And it's complicated, isn't it?
I love that story though, because it to me, I mean, there are different avenues that can play out, but I love how you describe how it does play out, because it certainly resonates with some of my experience too. Just sort of moving on a little bit, Tim. Another theme that comes up a lot in these discussions is around personal freedom, and I know that kind of before I had a child, I had a certain idea of what I thought my personal freedom was, and after I had a child, I had to completely recalibrate that, and it was actually one of the most difficult things for me, because partly coming to being a dad a little bit later in life, maybe than other people, I had a lot of years of experience of that personal freedom that really changed radically for me. And I wondered what your experience of that, whether it's important to you, that idea of personal freedom, how does it play out in your relationship and as a father?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and a really big question. I'm of years now enough to have a pretty good understanding of how I work, both the bits I'm proud of and the bits that I'm not so proud of, and therefore I know my limitations, and in many respects I'm able to give myself an easier time in terms of not driving for perfection in terms of who I am. But that area of perfection has always been a quite a visceral thing for me. And before I had children, I'm naturally quite introverted, very introverted, and I'm somebody who strives for perfection, and as part of that often does enjoys solo pursuits. So I would be the person who would disappear all day for bike ride, just love time on my own, or decides to do a recording project musically, so just becomes a hermit for a week, and just doesn't really sleep and just goes with the flow. But it's always in that strive for having a creative idea or having a physical pursuit that I want to conquer or accomplish, and then just going after it with everything that I have. When you have kids, and I think this also can relate to when you have a partner as well, when you're just in a relationship with someone, you can't just live your life and go with the flow in the same way. You can, and many people do, and I have to a certain extent. I've made mistakes in this area, but it doesn't do you any favors, or it doesn't do your kids or your partner any favors. So in terms of this whole area of personal space, I think it wasn't something for me that changed overnight. It's something that I've learned lessons along the way, and now my sense of normality over the last 15-16 years since having kids, I've had enough time for my sense of normality to shift to almost forgetting what it was like before having children. So it doesn't almost feel to me now like I don't have the personal space that I used to, because I don't remember what it used to be like. That seems like a lifetime ago. And in many respects, I'm really pleased, because where I'm naturally, as I say, quite introverted, I think had I not had children, had I not been in a relationship, I could have probably, as I got older, maybe I got more grumpy about stuff going on in the world and grumpy about other people, I would have just spent more and more time on my own, and that might not necessarily have been a healthy thing. And as part of that, I know I would have become more and more controlling about my environment too. And this, I'm kind of coming in to focus on another of the question in terms of how the thing that I do struggle with. If I lived on my own, I'd be someone who'd have quite a minimalist house. I like tidiness. I like to have good quality stuff, but not much stuff. Being a parent, particularly a parent of teenagers, means you have to completely lay that sensibility to one side. If me and my daughter have any arguments aside of just being around her very busy social life and not getting enough rest, it tends to be around the fact that my kids don't mind mess, and they will just spread out over the entire house to a point where I feel like I don't have a single surface or area of the house that is mine, just to keep a little bit tidy. And I'm very much, if I want to concentrate, if I want to feel at peace, I have to tidy up first. Not obsessively, but I do like space. So personal space for me now, if I start in the here and now, if it becomes an issue for me, it's much more around clutter and messiness. I can handle noise. I don't really mind noise, but yeah, it's kids being kids. 9 times out of 10, I've said 9 times out of 10 an awful lot during this conversation, but typically they only think about the here and now. So if there's something more interesting to do than clear up, they'll go and do that other thing. So yeah, a lot of my personal space now is spent amongst the clutter of my children and clearing up after them and all that kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, it's taking things that's still important to me, but stepping back from the saying, okay, that's important to me, but is it actually quite a selfish thing? Do I actually need to be concerned and give my energy to that? No, I really don't, in the context of where I'm at the moment in my life. Therefore, I'm just going to make a decision to push it to one side, recognize it as a thing, but push it to one side and have ways and strategies of not letting it encroach back and become a problem. And I think tied up within all of that, personal space wise, there's the classic that all parents of teenagers will know about, which is you suddenly feel like you have no time for your own relationship with your partner because your kids go to bed later than you, and they often have their friends around, so all the rooms are full of other people. So it can start to get in the way of just all the way from being able to just sit in the quiet and talk to your partner to more like the physical relationship stuff. It can get in the way of that as well, which in turn can be unhelpful in terms of the time and energy you have as a parent to give to your children. And one of the main ways that we've found of approaching that whole area is just to talk with our kids, to be open and honest with them. So not to try and keep it a secret, to say to them, we need our space, we need you to tidy up sometimes, we need you to think of us just like you want us to think of you, and working on those things as a unit together, as a team together.
Brilliant. I think that's such a helpful insight as well, Tim. Really appreciate you sharing it. So we're coming towards the end of our time, and just a final question from me, really. I think anybody listening to this, I mean, I've certainly got a ton out of it listening to you, and I really appreciate how frank you've been and reflective you are about your life and your role as a dad, and both when you've been self-employed and as an employee. Do you have any final advice for a dad who's struggling with that work-life integration dilemma that you so eloquently talked about earlier?
I think two things. One of them is to go easy on yourself. Don't overthink being a dad, and certainly don't overthink it in the context of your experience of being fathered. Focus on the here and now and the future, and realize within that children appreciate just as much, if not more, just you being present with them as they do you actually actively engaging them in conversation or playing games or whatever within that time. They literally just appreciate time, and time knowing that you're fully present, such that then conversation or whatever can happen as it naturally happens. You don't have to pre-organize, pre-arrange everything. So just make a conscious decision to declutter the rest of your life, at least to a point where you have points during the week where your children know this is when I've got dad 100%. And I think the second one, and this is linked in with me saying, don't be too hard on yourself. If there's anyone listening who's I'm sure there'll be people listening who say to this, I'm someone who, life is busy. It's partly just life is busy, partly because I'm quite driven as a person. I like to be in control of things. So if I would quite happily sit down and create a very detailed plan of how we're going to be family over the next week or month or whatever, but kids don't fit into tight confines of plans like we as adults like to make. And so therefore, sometimes you just have to let go a bit. And this is going to sound a bit strange, but it's impacted me a lot. I'm far beyond just being a parent, particularly over this last year. Someone gave me that nursery rhyme, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream, something like that.
Okay, yeah.
But the bit that stuck with what they were trying to get across to me is sometimes you've just got to get in the boat and go with the current of life, and life will take you where life takes you. But you've got to so it's being able to, as a dad, just be able to say, I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers. Number one important thing is just to be available to my kids, and not just physically available, but mentally, emotionally available. And then sometimes you just got to take a deep breath and just allow life and parenthood to carry you along. You can't grab a hold of every part of it and hang on and try and control it, because that's not how kids work. That's how adults like to work. It's a survival mechanism. But you'll burn yourself out as a parent if you try to do that. And then just a further parting bit of advice, if you like, and this particularly as your children get older, to spend time to talk with them. And one of the some of the most precious times I've had with my kids, and I don't do this nearly enough, is just go out walking with them. So like leave your phone at home or in the car, because phones are a massive distraction, and just go for a half an hour walk, whatever, with them, and just enjoy walking together initially, and then conversation opens up, and you both know that you're not distractible when you're walking. And it's just some of the best conversations happen, some of the best sort of spontaneous, oh Dad, I've just thought of something and I haven't told you about this before, but X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that? It's just what a wonderful opportunity to get to see how your children's minds are unfurling, and actually the depth that they often think on life, think about things in life around. But also it gives you an opportunity to impart some of your, hopefully, wisdom to them, and for you to begin connecting. If you can get into the habit of that as they're growing older, just having those regular times when you can go walking or whatever you enjoy doing together, really deepen and strengthen the relationship, and mean that during the times when you really do have to work, it won't matter. They'll forgive you those times, because they know that they've got the assurance that you're being very intentional about that. So if you're working, you've decided that we've agreed this is Dad working time. But if he's not, then this is our time, and there's no excuses.
Love that, Tim. Thanks so much. And thank you for everything you've shared today. If people want to...
Thank you for inviting me.
No, you're very welcome. If people want to find out more about you, where do they need to go and look?
Where can they go and look? I'm not a massive social media person. Social media, I have a love-hate relationship with social media. At the moment, they can. I've got a website that's been running for a while called runtherace.co.uk. You can go and have a look there. That's something that I want to pick back up again. There's some stuff on there. You can. I'm in the throes of launching something called Make Life Click, makelife.click. If you go to that address, makelife.click, I have an aspiration, a vision to create a space that sits somewhere between kind of Facebook and LinkedIn, a place where people can just talk about the integrated part of life between work and holy family social life, but a space where people can be a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more honest with each other. I just think that I'm seeing people write about that place more. I'm seeing an urgency in some people to talk and open up in that space more together in community, and people are starting to become a lot bolder in terms of not only wanting to do that behind closed doors, but actually wanting to express some of that stuff to the world too. So I'm that really intrigues me, and it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. It's just great that I'm seeing people start to open up in this area. It's like a realization is happening, and a recognition that we're not all perfect, and that it's okay to talk about stuff that we typically would never tell people about.
Right.
And that can be massively releasing, pressure releasing. So yeah, makelife.click. You can find out, hopefully, as over the next few months, a little bit more about me there too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tim. And you've really modeled that, I think, showing that vulnerability is okay. I've loved spending time with you. Thanks again.
Likewise, Matt. Thank you as well. And yeah, I'll look forward to hearing what others have to say about this whole subject, because I think it's really, really important. And I'm really thrilled that you're doing the work that you do.
Thank you.